They say blood is thicker than water, but on a cold Tuesday night in October in a forgotten town tucked between the Cascade Ridges and the steady October rain, a 17-year-old boy proved that courage is thicker than both. He lay bleeding on the cracked linoleum of a roadside diner, his life draining from him in a slow, dark river that crawled across the checkered floor because he had stepped in front of a girl whose name he did not know, whose story he had never heard, whose troubles were not his own. He did not know that the phone call she would make with hands slick and trembling and red would not be to the police. It would be to her father. And by the time the sun crested the eastern ridge above the quiet town of Hollow Creek, Oregon, the police would be the smallest of the town's worries. Because the horizon would not be glowing with sunlight, it would be glowing with chrome. 200 Iron Saints were coming, and they were not coming to visit. But before the thunder, before the army of leather and steel descended on a town that had never known anything louder than a 4th of July parade, there was a boy, and there was a girl, and the boy had been invisible his entire life. His name was Eli Hart, and he was 17 years old. Not invisible in any supernatural sense, invisible in the worst sense. The kind where people looked right through you the way you might look through a smudged window, trying to see something farther down the street. He worked the graveyard shift at Pop's Diner 4 nights a week on the edge of Hollow Creek, where Route 9 met the long, flat highway that led to anywhere else. He earned $7.25 an hour, plus whatever loose coins the truckers and the insomniacs left behind, which was almost never more than the weight of silence. He was tall and thin with shaggy brown hair that fell across his eyes like a curtain he was hiding behind. He wore the same rotation of 3 flannel shirts over white undershirts that his mother bought from the thrift store in Medford every September. His sneakers had holes worn through near the toes, and his hands smelled permanently of fryer grease and industrial soap the way another boy's hands might smell of cologne or fresh-cut grass. He had a quiet voice. He had a habit of looking down when adults spoke to him, not because he was shy exactly, but because somewhere along the way he had learned that the world paid more attention to you when you stopped asking it to. His mother was Marlene Hart, a small woman with tired eyes and hands the color of brick from years of hard wet work. She held 2 jobs: nights at the county hospital in the laundry feeding stained sheets into machines that hissed and rumbled through the dark hours like sleeping animals. Days cleaning houses on the east side of town, scrubbing bathrooms, mopping kitchens for families who left cash on the counter and never bothered to learn her last name. She had raised Eli alone since the morning he turned 9, the morning his father climbed into the family's Ford Taurus and drove away without a word, without a note, without even the small mercy of a goodbye. The car came back 6 months later, abandoned in the driveway with a blown transmission and a busted head gasket, like a final insult wrapped in rusted metal. His father did not come back with it. Eli had been trying to fix that car ever since. Every Saturday morning, rain or shine, he was out in the driveway with a borrowed socket wrench and a second-hand Haynes manual that had pages stuck together with old oil. He pulled the engine apart piece by piece. He cleaned each piece. He put it back together. He did this every week the way other boys played video games or rode their bikes to the lake. The neighbors thought it was a hobby. Marlene thought it was therapy. Eli knew the truth that neither of them would say out loud. He believed in some deep and irrational corner of his heart that if he could only fix the car, he could fix everything. That if the engine turned over, maybe the world would turn over too. Maybe the empty space his father had left behind would fill in like a pothole patched with fresh, dark asphalt. Maybe his mother would stop working 2 jobs. maybe the house would stop feeling like a place where someone was always about to walk in and never did. It never turned over, but every Saturday he tried again. Because Eli Hart did not know how to quit on something even when the something had quit on him a long time ago. Hollow Creek was the kind of town that lived in the margins of the country. It sat in a narrow valley between two ridges of the Cascade foothills, surrounded by Douglas fir forests so dense they pressed in on the houses like dark green walls. Main Street was 4 blocks long. There was a hardware store run by a man named Gus, who had been old for as long as anyone in town could remember. There was a barber shop with a striped pole that had stopped spinning in 1998 after the motor burned out, and nobody felt strongly enough to fix it. There was a white clapboard church with a bell that rang at 6 every morning, whether anyone was listening or not. There was a bar called the Rusty Nail that closed at 10 on weeknights because by 10, there was nobody left awake to drink past it. The population sign at the edge of town read 2,847. That was optimistic. Half the houses on the back roads had been empty since the lumber mill shut down in 2003. The young people left for Portland, for Eugene, for any place that still had a future. The old people stayed because they had nowhere else to go and because the mountains in the autumn were still beautiful, and that was something. Pop's Diner sat at the edge of all this, a squat, flat-roof building with aluminum siding that had once been white and was now the color of old teeth. A neon sign buzzed weakly in the rain. 24 hours, it said, except the word hours had burned out years ago, leaving only a tired, lopsided glow that promised 24 of something, and you could choose for yourself what that something might be. Inside the floor was checkered, black and white scuffed and stained by decades of boots and spilled coffee. The booths were red vinyl cracked along the seams, the foam stuffing showing through in places like wounds. A jukebox sat in the corner unplugged, gathering a thin gray fur of dust. The air always smelled the same. Burnt coffee, industrial cleaner, the faint permanent ghost of bacon grease that had soaked into the walls and the ceiling tiles and the very bones of the building over 40 years of breakfasts. That was where Eli was standing on Tuesday night when the girl walked in. Wren Calloway was 16 years old, and she had been on the road for 3 weeks. 3 weeks since she had walked out of a life that most people would have envied and that most people would never have understood. Her father was Royce Calloway. They called him Ironclad. He was the founding president of the Iron Saints Motorcycle Club, a man who commanded an army of riders who would lay down their lives at a single word from his mouth. He stood 6'4". He had a beard the color of weathered iron. His arms were thick as oak branches mapped with ink that told stories of long roads and old debts and a life lived entirely outside the lines that ordinary men drew around themselves. He was rich. He was feared in 11 states and respected in all 50. He had given Wren everything a girl was supposed to want: a roof, food on the table, men who would die for her at his single word, everything except a choice. Wren did not want the leather. She did not want the clubhouse with its stale smoke and its whispered conversations that stopped the moment she walked into a room. She did not want the armed escorts to school. She did not want the way her teachers had stopped calling on her in class because they were afraid of what would happen if she answered wrong and her father heard about it. She did not want the way grown men twice her size averted their eyes when she passed in a hallway, not out of respect for her, but out of fear of the man whose name she carried. She wanted to be ordinary. She wanted to walk into a room and be nobody's daughter, nobody's leverage, nobody's responsibility. She wanted to disappear. So one night while her father slept in the room down the hall, she packed a duffel bag. She emptied her savings account of $1,400 in cash, and she caught a Greyhound out of Reno at 4 in the morning with a one-way ticket and no plan beyond the next stop. She ditched her phone in a trash can in Sacramento. She cut her hair short in a gas station bathroom in Medford, watching the dark strands fall into the cracked porcelain sink, like pieces of the life she was leaving behind. She was going to become nobody. That was the plan. But the road had other plans. 3 weeks of cheap motels and coal bus stations and meals scraped together from vending machines had reduced her $1,400 to 23. Her clothes smelled like diesel and stale coffee. She had blisters on her feet from boots that had been built for the foot pegs of a motorcycle, not for the cracked sidewalks of strange towns. And then at a Greyhound station in Portland, she made a mistake that would change her life. She grabbed the wrong bag. It was a simple mistake. 2 black nylon duffels, no name tags, the kind of generic luggage 1,000 travelers carried through 1,000 bus stations every day. She slung it over her shoulder, her mind already on the next stop, the next motel, the next step in her disappearance, and she walked off the bus. It was not until 2 hours later, sitting in the bed of a stranger's pickup truck, that she had hitched a ride in watching the Oregon pines blur past in the gray afternoon light, that she finally unzipped the bag. It was not her clothes inside. It was not her toothbrush or her dog-eared paperback copy of East of Eden. Inside were bundles of pastries, thousands of dollars wrapped tight in rubber bands, stacked in tidy rows like bricks of green stone. And beneath the cash, taped to the lining of the bag, with strips of clear packing tape, a small black flash drive in a plastic case. Wren stared at the flash drive. Her hands began to shake. She knew with the clean, cold instinct of a girl who had grown up in the shadow of the outlaw world, who had watched men pass envelopes under tables and speak in codes she was never supposed to understand, that she was holding something that could get her killed. She did not plug in the flash drive, not yet. She did not count the cash. She zipped the bag shut and asked the driver to let her out at the next gas station, and she walked away from the truck with her heart hammering and her breath coming short and shallow. She thought about leaving the bag right there, setting it down by the pump and walking off into the rain and letting whatever dark gravity lived inside that black nylon shell become someone else's problem. But she could not, because she understood the math. If someone was looking for the bag, they would trace the Greyhound manifest. They would find the pickup driver. They would follow the trail of a girl with short dark hair and an oversized leather jacket. They would find her eventually. The only way to stay safe was to keep moving. The only way to figure out how to give the bag back without ending up in a shallow grave somewhere in the Oregon woods was to figure out what was on the drive. That was how Wren Calloway ended up in Hollow Creek, Oregon on a Tuesday night in October with a flat tire $23. To her name, a stolen bag full of secrets, and absolutely no one in the world she could call. Her car, a $1,500 beater she had bought with Wish in Eugene, blew its right front tire on Route 9 coming into town. She limped into the parking lot of the only place still showing light. The neon sign buzzed in the rain. Through the smeared glass of the windshield, she could see the warm yellow glow of the diner interior. A figure moved behind the counter. One customer sat in a booth near the window, an old man with white hair working slowly on a piece of pie. She sat in the car for a long time, both hands on the steering wheel, the rain drumming on the roof. She looked at the bag on the passenger seat. She looked at the flat tire. She looked at the $23 in her wallet. Then she pulled the hood of her oversized leather jacket up over her head, grabbed the bag, and walked into the diner. The bell above the door chimed with a tired little jingle. Behind the counter, Eli was wiping down the formica with a rag that looked like it needed its own washing. The old man in the booth was named Pete, a retired postal worker who came in every Tuesday for cherry pie and silenced two things Hollow Creek had in great supply. Eli did not look up at first. He had grown used to the sound of the bell, the rare trucker hauling lumber down from the mountains, the odd insomniac who could not sleep and did not want to be alone, the lost traveler who had taken a wrong exit off the interstate and ended up in a town that was not on most maps. They came, they ordered coffee, they left. Nobody stayed in Hollow Creek on purpose, but when he did look up, something made him pause. The girl who had walked in was young, maybe 16, with short dark hair that looked like it had been cut in a hurry, uneven around the edges, sticking up in the places where the scissors had not been steady. She wore a leather jacket 2 sizes too large for her, the sleeves swallowing her hands almost to the fingertips. She had on combat boots that were dark with rain scuffed at the toes. She carried a black duffel bag slung over one shoulder, and the weight of it pulled her frame to one side like a small ship listing in rough water. But it was her eyes that stopped him. They were the color of storm clouds, and they moved across the room with a precision that was almost military. She scanned the corners, the exits, the old man in the booth, the hallway to the restrooms in the back. She cataloged everything in 2 seconds flat the way someone does when they have been trained or when they have been hunted. She slid into a booth near the back, positioning herself so she could see both the front door and the hallway. She set the bag on the seat beside her, one hand resting on it like she was protecting something precious or something dangerous. She did not take off her jacket. Eli walked over with a laminated menu and a glass of water. Black coffee, the girl said. Her voice was steady but quiet, the voice of someone who had learned to take up as little space as possible. And fries if you've got them. We've always got fries, Eli said. He set the menu down. She was not looking at him. She was watching the parking lot through the window, watching the rain come down in long silver sheets across the buzzing neon glow. Rough night, he said. It was the most he had said to a stranger in weeks. He was not entirely sure why he said it. Maybe because she looked the way he felt most days. Alone, tired, a long way from anywhere that mattered. She looked up at him. For a moment, something shifted behind her guarded eyes. A flicker of surprise, or maybe recognition. The recognition of one invisible person seeing another. Two people who had spent their lives being looked through, suddenly visible to each other in the fluorescent glow of a diner that smelled like burnt coffee and abandoned dreams. Just passing through, she said. She was not just passing through. He could see the flat tire from the window, the small sedan sitting crooked in the parking lot like a wounded animal. But he did not push. He went back to the counter. He poured the coffee. He dropped a basket of fries into the oil. The oil sizzled and popped a sound as familiar to him as his own heartbeat. For a few long minutes, the diner existed in its usual state of quiet suspension. Rain on the roof, the hum of the old refrigerator, the slow, steady tick of the clock on the wall, old Pete turning a page of his newspaper. The world outside was dark and wet, and the world inside was warm and small, and for those few minutes, nothing bad could reach them. Eli brought Wren her coffee and her fries. She wrapped both hands around the mug like she was trying to absorb the warmth through her skin. like she had not been warm in a long time. "Your tire is flat," Eli said quietly. "I know, I've got a jack in the back. I can take a look when my shift is over." She looked up at him then, really looked this time. She studied his face the way she had been taught to study people, looking for the angle, the motive, the hidden agenda. He was skinny, a little awkward, kind eyes behind all that hair. He was offering to help a stranger at midnight in the rain, and he was doing it because he did not know how not to. There was no angle. There was no motive. He was just a boy who saw someone who needed help and could not look the other way. "You don't have to do that," she said. "I know," Eli said, and he almost smiled. It was a small thing, barely a twitch at the corner of his mouth, but it was real. It was the most honest expression she had seen on a human face in 3 weeks. He went back behind the counter. She ate her fries, slowly sipping her coffee. For the first time in 3 weeks, the knot in her chest loosened just a little. There was something about this place, this sad little diner in this forgotten town, this boy with his dish rag and his quiet kindness. Something that made her feel for the first time in a long time that she could breathe. That feeling lasted exactly 4 minutes. The bell above the door chimed again, and the air in the diner changed. It was not a sound, it was a shift, like the barometric pressure dropping before a storm, like the moment before lightning strikes when every hair on your body stands up and the air tastes like copper. Wren felt it before she saw it. Her hand moved instinctively to the bag beside her. 4 men walked in. They were not locals. They were older, somewhere in their mid-20s, wearing expensive streetwear that looked absurd in a diner that smelled like grease and desperation. Two of them were thick, heavy-set, with the flat, watchful look of men who had done ugly things and would do them again without hesitation. The third was wiry and twitchy, his eyes flicking around the room like a rat searching for the nearest exit. But it was the fourth man who made Wren's blood turn to ice. He was lean with sharp cheekbones and a tattoo of a scorpion crawling up the side of his neck. His eyes were dead, not angry, not cruel, just empty, like a shark's eyes, like looking into two holes where a soul should have been. He moved with a lazy confidence, his hands in the pockets of his black jacket, a slow smirk pulling at the corner of his mouth, the smirk of a man who enjoyed fear the way some people enjoyed music. His name was Crane. He spotted Wren immediately. His smirk widened into something that was almost a smile, but had none of a smile's warmth. "Well, well," he said. His voice was slick and mocking, the kind of voice that inflicted fear casually the way some people inflicted bruises. The little runaway princess. Wren did not scream. She did not run. She had been raised in a world where fear was a weapon, and showing it was the same as handing your enemy a loaded gun. She set her coffee down. She gripped the edge of the table until her knuckles turned white. "Leave me alone, Crane," she said. Her voice was flat, controlled. "I told you people, I'm done. You don't get to be done, sweetheart." Crane stepped closer. The other 3 men fanned out behind him, blocking the path to the front door. The wiry one drifted toward the hallway, cutting off the back exit. "You took something that doesn't belong to you. My employer is unhappy. He wants the bag, and he wants you in a car, right now." Wren's mind was racing. They had found her, despite the ditched phone, the cut hair, the cash, the careful avoidance of cameras. They had found her in 3 weeks across 3 states to a diner in a town that nobody had ever heard of. That was not luck. That was not just resources. That was information. Someone had told them where she was. And then as she watched Crane's smirk and the way his men positioned themselves, something colder hit her. Crane had walked through the door and made straight for her booth. He had not glanced at the counter. He had not glanced at the back. He had known exactly where she was sitting before he ever opened the door. Someone in this room or someone who had been in this room had told him. She filed that away in a quiet, dark corner of her mind. She would deal with it later if she got a later. She spoke loudly, making sure old Pete in the corner could hear every word. I grabbed the wrong bag at the bus station. It was an accident. I'll give it back. But I'm not getting in a car with you. That's not how this works, Crane said. Then we have a problem, Wren said, because there's an old man right there with the phone and the police station is 5 minutes away. You want to add kidnapping to whatever your boss is already wanted for. It was a calculated bluff. She did not even know if Hollow Creek had a police station, but she was buying seconds, stretching the moment. Her eyes flicked to Pete in the corner. The old man had stopped eating his pie. He was watching his weathered face tight with alarm, one gnarled hand already reaching into his coat pocket for his phone. Crane's dead eyes narrowed. He was not used to resistance. He was especially not used to it from a teenage girl. Last chance, princess. Get up. Bring the bag. Walk out that door, or this gets ugly. Wren stared at him. She did not move. No, she said. The word hung in the air like a grenade with the pin pulled. Crane's hand shot forward. He grabbed her wrist across the table. His fingers dug into her skin with a grip like a vice made of bone. He yanked her forward, pulling her half out of the booth. Pain lanced up her arm. Her coffee cup toppled and spilled across the formica in a dark, slow flood. I wasn't asking, he hissed. Behind the counter, Eli Hart stopped breathing. He had watched the whole thing unfold with a growing dread that started in his stomach and climbed into his throat like something alive. He knew with an instinct as old as his bones that he should stay out of this. These men were dangerous. The kind of dangerous that did not exist in Hollow Creek. The kind of dangerous that came from a world Eli had only seen in movies and on the late-night news. The smart thing was to duck into the back office, lock the door, call 911, and hide behind the fryer until the deputies arrived. That was what any reasonable person would do. That was what his mother would want him to do. Stay safe, Eli. Don't be a hero. Heroes end up in hospitals. But then he saw the Crane grab her wrist. He saw the pain flash across her face, quickly smothered, because she was too proud or too stubborn to give Crane the satisfaction of seeing her hurt. And he saw her eyes. It was not just fear in those eyes. It was the look of someone who knew with whole and certain knowledge that if she walked out that door, she was never coming back. It was the look of someone about to vanish from the face of the earth. Eli Hart did not think. He did not calculate the odds. He did not weigh the risks. He did not ask himself whether what he was about to do was smart or brave or stupid. He just moved. He vaulted over the counter. It was a move he had imagined 100 times during long, slow shifts. Hands on the formica, swing the legs over, land on the other side. He had never actually done it before. His sneaker caught the edge of the coffee pot and sent it crashing to the floor in a small explosion of glass and brown liquid. But he stuck the landing. He put himself between Wren and Crane. His chest was heaving. His hands were shaking. He was holding a dirty dish rag in one fist like it was a sword, a shield, something more than what it was. Let her go. His voice cracked on the second word. He was terrified. Every nerve in his body was screaming at him to run, to hide, to be invisible again. but his feet were planted on the checkered floor, and he was not moving. He was not moving because something deeper than fear, something that lived in the marrow of who he was, would not let him stand behind a counter while a girl was dragged out into the rain. Crane stared at him. For a long moment, the diner was completely silent except for the hum of the refrigerator and the rain hammering on the roof. Then Crane laughed. It was a cold, dry sound, like stones scraping together. Look at this. The busboy wants to play hero. He released Wren's wrist and turned his full attention to Eli. His dead eyes measured the boy the way a wolf measures prey. Go pour some coffee, kid. This is grown-up business. Let her go, Eli said again. Louder this time, steadier. I'm calling the police, old Pete shouted from the corner. His hands were shaking, but he had his phone out and was jabbing at the screen with arthritic fingers. That was the trigger. Crane moved fast, faster than Eli was ready for. He pulled a collapsible baton from inside his jacket and flicked it open with a sharp metallic snap. The sound alone was enough to make Eli's blood run cold. But Crane did not go for the old man. He swung at Eli. The baton caught Eli on the forearm with a crack that echoed through the diner. Pain exploded up his arm, white hot, like someone had pressed a branding iron against his bone. He gasped and staggered back. But he did not go down. Adrenaline surged through him. Raw and animal like electricity, he shoved Crane backward with both hands. Hard. Harder than he knew he could push. Crane stumbled, genuinely surprised by the force. Get him, he snapped at his men. Run, Eli yelled at Wren. Go out the back. Wren scrambled out of the booth, grabbing the bag, but the wiry man was blocking the hallway, and one of the heavy-set thugs was lunging toward her from the side. Eli threw himself at the closest one. They crashed into a table, sending salt shakers and napkin holders and bottles of ketchup flying. Glass shattered. Condiments sprayed across the floor in red, and yellow streaks. Eli fought with everything he had. Wild, desperate, throwing punches that had no technique but plenty of fury. He caught the man square on the jaw with a right hook that surprised them both. The thugs stumbled, momentarily stunned. But there were 4 of them, and they were professionals. Wren did not run. She could have. The hallway was momentarily clear. She had spent 3 weeks learning how to disappear. She was good at it. But she watched Eli, this skinny kid she had known for 15 minutes, fighting 3 men twice his size because he could not stand by while a stranger was taken. He was getting beaten badly. A fist to the ribs, a knee to the thigh. He kept swinging, kept fighting, but he was losing ground. She made a decision. She grabbed the nearest heavy object she could find. A full glass bottle of ketchup, the old-fashioned kind, thick and weighty in her hand. She gripped it by the neck. She swung it with both hands. She brought it crashing down on the back of the nearest thug's skull. The bottle did not break the way it does in the movies. It connected with a dull, wet thud that vibrated up her arms. The man crumpled, instantly hitting the floor like a sack of wet cement. But the distraction cost Eli his focus. He turned toward the sound for a fraction of a second. That was when Crane came from behind. He had put the baton away. In his hand now was a knife, a 6-inch switchblade with a matte black handle. The blade caught the harsh fluorescent light and gleamed like something cruel and certain. Wren saw it first. No, she screamed. Eli turned. Too late, and not enough. The blade punched into his side just below the ribs on the left. It went in deep. Wren heard the sound, a wet, intimate sound that she would hear in her nightmares for years to come. The sound of steel entering flesh, of something being broken that could never be fully repaired. Eli gasped. The air left his lungs all at once like someone had ripped the plug out of a balloon. He looked down at the knife in Crane's hand still buried in his side, and his expression was not pain. It was surprise. Pure, uncomprehending surprise, as if his body had not yet informed his brain what had happened. Crane pulled the blade free. The blood came immediately. Dark, fast, terrifyingly warm. It soaked through Eli's flannel shirt and spilled over his hand as he clutched his side. He fell to his knees, then to his back. The diner floor was cold against his skin, a mosaic of shattered glass and spilled ketchup, and his own blood spreading in a slow, dark pool. Crane kicked him once in the chest with cold efficiency. Eli's head cracked against the tile. Stupid kid, Crane spat. Sirens, distant but closing. Old Pete had gotten through. We've got to go. The wiry man hissed, his eyes darting to the window. Leave her, too much heat now. Crane looked at Wren, then he looked at the boy bleeding on the floor. Something ugly and satisfied flickered in those dead eyes. He pointed at her with the bloody knife. This isn't over. Tell your daddy we're coming for the bay and for the rest. They bolted, all four of them, one of them half dragging the man Wren had hit with the bottle. They sprinted through the front door and piled into a black Chevy Tahoe that peeled out of the parking lot just as the first red and blue lights appeared through the rain. Then they were gone, and the silence that followed was worse than the violence, because silence is where the consequences live. Wren was on her knees beside Eli before the echo of the Tahoe's tires had faded. The floor was a war zone. Glass, ketchup, mustard, blood, so much blood. It was spreading faster than she had thought possible, pooling around his body, soaking into the knees of her jeans warm against her skin. Eli's face was gray. His eyes were open but unfocused, staring up at the flickering fluorescent light above him. His breathing was shallow, rapid, each breath a thin whistle that sounded wrong, deeply, fundamentally wrong. Wren did not panic. She had grown up in clubhouses where men came in bleeding from bar fights and worse. She had watched her father's medic stitch wounds on kitchen tables while a television played in the background. She knew the basics. She ripped off her leather jacket. She balled it up. She pressed it against the wound in his side with both hands, leaning her full weight into it. "Stay with me," she said. Her voice was calm, forceful. The voice of a girl who had decided that this boy was not going to die in her watch. "Stay with me, Eli. Look at me. Do not close your eyes." Eli blinked. His gaze drifted to her face. He coughed and pink froth flecked his lips. That was bad. She knew it was bad. It meant the blade had gone deep enough to reach the lung, or close enough that it didn't matter. "You're okay," Eli whispered. His voice was barely there, a dry rasp. "They didn't take you," Wren said. Tears were burning her eyes, but she did not let them fall. "Not yet. No, they didn't. Because of you. You held the line." Eli tried to smile. It was lopsided pale, and it broke something inside Wren that she had not known could break. "Good," he breathed. "That's good." Then his eyes rolled back and his body went slack beneath her hands. Old Pete was beside her, his gnarled fingers pressing a stack of diner napkins against the wound alongside her own. His face was white, but his hands were steady. The hands of a man who had carried mail bags through 40 winters of blizzards and knew how to keep going when the world was coming apart. "Ambulance is 3 minutes out, girl. He's strong. He'll make it." Wren did not take her hands off the wound. She did not look up from his face. She kept the pressure. She kept talking. She told him to hold on. She told him the ambulance was close. She told him she was not going to let him go. She meant it. She meant it more than she had ever meant anything in her 16 years on this earth. 3 minutes felt like 3 hours. The ambulance arrived with the police. Paramedics rushed in, took over. Cut away Eli's shirt started IV lines. They worked fast. Their voices were clipped and urgent. They loaded him onto a stretcher and into the back of the ambulance with a speed that told Wren everything she needed to know about how bad it was. When people moved that fast, it meant there was no time to waste. She stood in the middle of the ruined diner covered in his blood. Her leather jacket was soaked dark. Her hands were red up to the wrists. She was shaking. Not from the cold, from the delayed shock of adrenaline finally releasing its grip. A deputy tried to talk to her. She could not hear him. The sirens were still screaming. She followed the ambulance to the hospital. She walked because her car had a flat tire, and nobody had thought to offer her a ride. She walked 2 miles through the rain, the black duffel bag slung over her shoulder, her boots splashing through puddles that reflected the red and blue of patrol cars racing past her toward the diner. She did not feel the rain. She did not feel the cold. She felt only one thing. A burning crystalline resolve that settled into her bones like molten iron cooling into steel. This was her fault, all of it. A boy she had known for 15 minutes was on an operating table because she had walked into his diner carrying a problem she had no right to bring to his door. She could not undo that. She could not take back the knife, but she could make sure it meant something. She could make sure the people who did this answered for it. And she could make sure Eli Hart did not die in the dark without someone fighting for him the way he had fought for her. The hospital lobby was small and lit too brightly. The fluorescence buzzed overhead, casting everything in a flat, sterile white. Wren sat in a plastic chair in the waiting room, still wearing his blood. A nurse offered her a change of clothes. She refused. She did not deserve clean clothes. Not while he was in there fighting. At 3 in the morning, the surgeon emerged. Dr. Caldwell, a lean man with silver hair and steady hands, his scrubs sweat-soaked, his eyes bloodshot. The boy made it through surgery, Caldwell said. Wren's entire body sagged with a relief so physical it was almost violent. But it was close, the doctor continued. The blade lacerated his liver and nicked his diaphragm. We had to remove his spleen. He's lost a massive amount of blood. He's in a medically induced coma, 40%. If he doesn't develop an infection and if his vitals stabilize over the next 48 hours, he has a fighting chance. But I won't lie to you, it's going to be close, 40%, less than a coin flip. Marlene Hart arrived at 3:15 in the morning, a coat thrown over her nightgown, her hair unbrushed, her face a mask of terror. When she saw Wren, she froze. "Are you hurt?" Marlene asked. Because that was the kind of woman she was. Even in the worst moment of her life, her first instinct was to care for someone else. "No, ma'am," Wren said. "This isn't my blood. It's your son's. He saved my life tonight." Marlene's face crumbled. She collapsed into a chair and pulled a rosary from her coat pocket. The beads clicked softly between her fingers, a tiny rhythmic sound that filled the silent waiting room like a heartbeat. Wren sat down across from her. She could not leave. Not yet. They sat together through the darkest hours of the morning. Two strangers bound together by a boy's courage in a pool of blood on a diner floor. Marlene prayed. Wren watched the clock. The minutes crawled like wounded animals. And then Wren made the call that would change everything. She had a cheap prepaid phone she had bought in Eugene. She had never used it. She had kept it for one purpose, a phone number she had memorized and sworn she would never dial unless the world was ending. The world was ending. She walked to the corner of the waiting room. She dialed. It rang twice. Yeah, a deep voice, no hello, no greeting, just a single syllable that sounded like gravel rolling in a cement mixer. Wren closed her eyes. She had not heard that voice in 3 weeks. It sounded like home. It sounded like safety. And it sounded like everything she had been running from. Daddy, she whispered. The silence on the other end was instant and absolute. It was the silence of a man whose entire body had gone rigid, whose heart had stopped between beats. Wren, where are you? Are you hurt? No, I'm okay. But Daddy, they found me. Crane and his crew, the ones who work for Holloway. They tracked me down. I'm on my way. Wait. And here it was. The moment that separated Wren from every other club daughter, every other runaway, every other girl who had ever called her father for help. She did not just call for rescue, she set the terms. A boy saved me tonight. He works at a diner. He's 17 years old. He stepped between me and a knife. He's in surgery right now, and they are telling me he might not make it. He doesn't know who I am. He doesn't know who you are. He just saw a girl in trouble, and he stood up. He bled for me, Daddy. When Roy spoke again, his voice was different. The sharpness was still there, but beneath it was something raw, something old. What is his name? Eli. Eli Hart. He's barely breathing. Tell the doctors to do everything. Tell them money is no object. Tell them Royce Calloway is paying every bill. And then she drew her line in the sand. You come for him, not for me. You come because a boy is dying for doing the right thing. And you come within the law. No rivers, no ditches, no disappearances. You come right or you don't come at all. The pause was long. She could hear him breathing. She could hear faintly the sound of boots on concrete. He was already moving. You don't give me orders, Wren. I'm not giving you an order, Daddy. I'm asking you to be the man I used to believe you were. Another pause. Longer. We're coming, he said. All of us. The line went dead. Wren lowered the phone. Her hand was shaking. Across the room, a tired-looking man with thinning hair and a nicotine stain on his right index finger had arrived at the nurse's station. Detective Marcus Whitlock. He was watching her from across the lobby with a mixture of suspicion and unease. Who was that? Whitlock asked, walking over. My father, Wren said. Is he coming to pick you up? Wren looked out the window at the dark, empty parking lot. The rain had not stopped. It streamed down the glass in silver rivulets, distorting the glow of the streetlights into long, melting shapes. He's coming, she said quietly, but he isn't coming alone. She did not know yet that the man asking her this question was the second betrayal she would uncover in the next 24 hours. She did not know that the calm, professional concern in his voice was a costume he had been wearing for 4 years. She only knew somewhere underneath everything that there was something wrong with the way he watched her, something that did not belong on the face of a man who was supposed to be on her side. She filed it away. The way she had filed away the strange certainty of Crane walking straight to her booth. There was a thread in this. She did not yet know what it tied together. But she would. By the time the sun rose over Hollow Creek, she would. It started around 5:30. The first hint of gray light was touching the eastern sky just enough to separate the mountains from the clouds. Deputy Harris was parked on Route 9, drowsy, half asleep in his cruiser, the radar gun on his lap. He was not watching for what came. He felt it before he heard it. A tremor, subtle at first, like a heavy truck on a nearby road. The coffee in his cup holder rippled. The rearview mirror trembled. Then came the sound. It started low, a drone like a swarm of hornets far away. But it grew. It deepened. It turned into a roar that was not a roar but a thunder. A rolling, continuous thunder that shook the windows of his cruiser and rattled the fillings in his teeth. V-twin engines, the distinctive syncopated heartbeat of American iron. Not one, not 10, hundreds. Harris looked in his side mirror. His jaw dropped. Cresting the hill 2 miles back, a wall of headlights had appeared. They stretched across both lanes of the highway, three abreast, running lights blazing like the eyes of an advancing army. The lead bike was a massive custom Harley Road King, blacked out with ape-hanger handlebars and a rider who looked less like a man and more like a monument carved from granite and leather. Harris fumbled for his radio. "Dispatch. This is Harris on Route 9. We have a situation." By the time the sun fully broke over the ridge, the roar had consumed Hollow Creek. Citizens waking for work peered through their curtains and saw something out of a fever dream. A river of black leather and polished chrome rolling down Main Street, shaking the autumn leaves from the trees rattling the windows of the hardware store, drowning out the church bells that rang at 6 every morning. They turned onto Elm Street toward the hospital. Wren heard them before she saw them. She was standing at the window of the waiting room. Marlene was asleep in the chair behind her, finally claimed by exhaustion. The first light of dawn was coloring the sky in shades of ash and steel. Then the glass began to vibrate. The sound rose from the earth like something alive. A rumble that grew into a growl, that grew into a roar that shook the framed pictures on the walls. Wren pressed her hand against the window. She felt the vibration through her palm, through her bones. They came around the corner in a wave. Row after row of motorcycles' headlights, blazing chrome gleaming in the early light. They filled the parking lot. They spilled onto the street. They lined the sidewalks. 200 machines. 200 men arranged in perfect rows like soldiers on a parade ground. At the front, the massive Road King killed its engine. The silence that followed was deafening. 200 engines cut out in a wave, one after another, the silence spreading through the formation like a held breath. Royce Calloway dismounted. He took off his helmet and hung it on the handlebar. He walked straight toward the sliding glass doors of the hospital. Behind him, 200 men dismounted and stood in rank, silent, arms crossed, waiting. Inside the waiting room, Wren watched her father push through the doors. He filled the room with his presence the way a thunderstorm fills a valley. Nurses froze. An orderly dropped a clipboard. Even the hum of the fluorescent light seemed to quiet. His eyes found her. "Daddy," she said. She did not run to him. She stood her ground, because that was what she had promised herself she would do. She would not collapse into his arms like a little girl. Not now, not after everything she had done to prove she was more than that. But Royce crossed the room in 3 strides and wrapped her in his arms anyway. For one moment the mask slipped. He was not a club president. He was not ironclad. He was a father who had not slept in 3 weeks. A man who had torn the West Coast apart looking for his daughter. He held her so tightly she could not breathe. She let him. Just for a moment. Then she pulled back. "I'm okay," she said, looking up at him with those fierce storm cloud eyes, "but he isn't." Room 304. His name is Eli Hart. 40% chance. His mother is right there. Royce released her. He turned. His eyes found Marlene Hart, who had been jolted awake by the noise and was now standing trembling against the wall, clutching her rosary as if it were the only thing between her and the end of the world. Royce walked over to her. The leather of his cut creaked with every step. His boots were heavy on the linoleum. He was a terrifying figure, a mountain of muscle and ink and scars. And Marlene was shaking so hard the rosary beads were clicking like small bones. He stopped in front of her. He slowly removed his sunglasses. His eyes were red-rimmed from the wind and the worry and the long night ride. But they were kind, unexpectedly, unmistakably kind. He went down on one knee. The president of the Iron Saints knelt on the scuffed linoleum floor of a county hospital in front of a cleaning lady in a nightgown. Ma'am, Roy said. His voice was a low rumble, but it was gentle, reverent. My name is Royce Calloway. Your son saved my little girl's life last night. Marlene stared at him. She could not speak. Her lips moved, but no sound came out. There is no debt I can pay that equals what he did. Royce continued, but I promise you this, your boy is under my protection now. He is under the protection of the Iron Saints, the men who did this to him. We are going to find them. He stood. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. And God help them, he said, because the police won't be able to. Wren watched from across the room. She watched her father kneel before a stranger, and she saw for the first time in years something she had almost forgotten. She saw the man she used to believe in, the man who had built his kingdom not on fear, but on a code. Loyalty, earned debts, the strong protecting the weak. She had set the terms. He had met them. So far. But the sun was barely up. And somewhere in this hospital, in this town, in the dark spaces between the truth and the lie, two men who had betrayed her were walking around in the daylight, drinking coffee, doing their jobs, pretending to be on her side. And on a flash drive in her pocket, 3 files were waiting. One of them, the third one, the one she had not yet opened, was going to tear her world apart in a way that no knife and no man and no army of motorcycles ever could. The hardest part was not over. The hardest part had not yet begun. By noon, the town was holding its breath. The Iron Saints had settled over Hollow Creek like an occupying army, quiet and disciplined, but unmistakably present. The bikers rotated shifts. Some slept in the waiting room stretched across plastic chairs that were never built for men their size. Others patrolled the hallways in pairs, polite and silent. The nurses and the staff adapted with the resigned practicality of people who had no choice. The bikers said please and thank you. They held doors open for women carrying clipboards. They kept their voices low near patient rooms. It was by all accounts the most courteous occupation in the history of small American towns. Royce had not moved from the ICU waiting area. He stood by the window with a paper cup of black coffee in one massive hand, watching the rain streak the glass. Doyle, his sergeant-at-arms, a wiry man with a shaved head and a long, pale scar running from his left ear to his chin, stood beside him. They spoke in low voices. They did not look at each other. They looked at the parking lot the way old soldiers look at terrain. Dr. Caldwell delivered the morning update. Eli had made it through the night. Vitals were stabilizing. 48 hours remained critical. Royce demanded whatever resources the boy needed. He turned to Doyle and ordered him in a voice that did not allow for argument to set up a fund for the Hart family. Mortgage, utilities, food, everything. Marlene Hart would not worry about a single bill from this day forward. Doyle nodded once and moved. Then Sheriff Beckett arrived with his deputies and Detective Marcus Whitlock, and the confrontation that followed was as inevitable as it was one-sided. Beckett was a thick-shouldered man in his late 50s, with a gray mustache and the patient, wary eyes of a man who had been a cop in a small town for 30 years and had watched the world get harder year by year around him. He was not a bad man. He was a tired one. And tired men faced with 200 motorcycles in their parking lot made calculations. Mr. Calloway, Beckett said, "We're going to need your boys to clear out." "My boys are parked legally," Royce said without looking at him. "They aren't blocking emergency access. They aren't disturbing patients. They're family of a victim." Family, Royce said. Beckett looked over Royce's shoulder. Detective Whitlock stood a few steps behind him. Whitlock had a thin face and tired skin and a nicotine stain on his right index finger, like an old burn that had never healed. He was watching Royce with the careful attention of a man taking notes. "We found your getaway vehicle," Doyle said. His voice was casual, conversational. "Black Chevy Tahoe, stolen plates out of Salem, ditched on a logging road off Route 4, about 6 miles up. Keys still in the ignition. Looked like they were in a hurry." "That's police business," Beckett said. "It was police business," Doyle said. "Now it's just business." Wren watched the exchange from down the hallway. She had pulled the hood of her gray sweatshirt up to keep her face partly in shadow. She had washed Eli's blood off her hands. She had not changed her jeans. The dark stains on the knees had dried into something that looked like rust. She was watching Whitlock. When Doyle said the word Tahoe, Whitlock did not react with surprise. He did not flinch. He did not raise his eyebrows the way a tired detective should raise his eyebrows when civilians, especially these civilians, hand him an unexpected piece of evidence on a silver plate. He reacted with calculation. A small, cold twitch at the corner of his mouth. The micro-expression of a man who already knew somehow where that vehicle was, and had chosen for reasons of his own not to find it himself. Wren filed it away in the same dark corner where she had filed Crane, walking straight to her booth. 2 threads. They were starting to braid. After the police retreated, Royce walked back into the ICU to sit with Marlene. Wren found her opening. She slipped down to the small administrative office on the first floor, where a kind night shift nurse named Ruth had left a borrowed laptop charging on a side table. Ruth had given Wren the password an hour earlier with a look that asked no questions and expected no answers. Wren closed the door. She locked it. She sat down at the desk. She pulled the flash drive out of her pocket. The plastic case was scratched and dented. It looked like the kind of thing you would find in a junk drawer. She plugged it in. The drive contained 3 files: a spreadsheet, a document, a video. She opened the spreadsheet first. It took her less than 30 seconds to understand what she was looking at, and when she did, the blood drained from her face. It was a ledger. Dates, names, amounts, payments made by Vincent Holloway to law enforcement officers, to city officials, to judges, to federal agents, across 3 states, Oregon, Washington, Nevada. The amounts ranged from $5,000 to $200,000. The dates went back 4 years. There were dozens of names, some she recognized from news reports: a state senator, a Port Authority director, a federal drug supervisor. Then a name jumped off the screen and hit her like a fist: Detective Marcus Whitlock, Hollow Creek County Sheriff's Department. monthly payments of $3,000, 4 years running. The last payment it dated 6 days ago. The room tilted. The detective investigating Eli's stabbing, the man who had tried to take her statement, the man who was right now processing the Tahoe. He was on Vincent Holloway's payroll. Everything Whitlock learned would go straight back to Holloway. The investigation was compromised from the inside. It had been compromised before it ever started. She kept scrolling. The second name was worse. Trent Boudreaux, Prospect Iron Saints, Northern Nevada chapter. Quarterly payments of $10,000. 18 months running. Wren stared at the screen until the letters blurred. Trent Boudreaux. She knew him. 22 years old. Eager, one of the new prospects her father had been grooming for full membership over the last 2 years. He had been at the clubhouse in Reno the night she left. He had been one of the men assigned to watch over her in the weeks before after the second time she had argued with her father about going to a public school. He knew her habits, her favorite bus routes, the Greyhound stations she had once mentioned wanting to visit. He had fed her location to Holloway's people. He was the reason Crane had found her in a town nobody had ever heard of. He was the reason Eli Hart was upstairs with 40 stitches and a 40% chance of seeing his 18th birthday. Wren closed her eyes. She breathed through her nose. She let the rage move through her like a wave, and then she let it pass. Rage was a luxury. She did not have time for luxuries. She opened the second file. It was a financial map, routing numbers, shell companies, wire transfers, hundreds of millions of dollars moving across borders hidden behind a labyrinth of legitimate-looking businesses. This was the entire digital skeleton of Vincent Holloway's money laundering empire. With the right prosecutor, you could put Holloway away for the rest of his natural life. She did not open the video file. Not yet. She felt somehow that she was not ready for it. There was an instinct deep in animal that told her the third file was not just evidence. It was something else, something personal. She closed the laptop. She sat in the quiet office and thought. Her first instinct was to go to her father, to tell him that Trent had betrayed the club, that a prospect had sold out his daughter. But she knew Royce. If she told him Trent would disappear, a logging road, a shallow grave, and if that happened, the evidence would be tainted. Defense lawyers would argue fabrication. They would argue retaliation. They would argue 1,000 things, and Holloway, with his lawyers and his money and his network, would walk out of a courtroom a free man. The evidence needed to be exposed cleanly, legally, through a process that would hold up under federal scrutiny. She slipped the flash drive back into her jeans pocket. She left the laptop where it was. She went to find Trent. She found him in the hospital cafeteria, sitting alone at a corner table picking at a turkey sandwich, with the unenthusiastic posture of a man who was hungry but had forgotten how to taste food. His prospect cut hung on him like a coat that had never quite fit. His eyes were nervous, jumping from the entrance to the soda machine and back the way the eyes of a guilty man jump. Wren slid into the seat across from him. He looked up. Something flickered across his face. Surprise. And underneath the surprise, a flash of something else. Something colder and older. Guilt, Wren, he said. He tried to make it sound casual. It did not come out casual. It came out like a man trying to remember how a normal voice was supposed to sound. I want to talk to you, she said. Sure, yeah, of course. She did not waste time. She laid the facts out the way her father laid out a chessboard. quietly, calmly, one piece at a time. I have a flash drive with a ledger on it. Your name is on it. Quarterly payments of $10,000 from a man named Vincent Holloway. 18 months. You told them where I would be. You told them about the Greyhound. You told them about Hollow Creek. Trent's face did something complicated. The skin around his eyes went tight. The color drained out of his cheeks in a slow, sick way, like watching paint drip down a wall. She had her phone in her lap recording. She had hit the button before she sat down. That's not, he started. Don't, she said. Don't insult me. I know what it says. I know what you did. I'm not here to pretend. He looked at her. He looked at the cafeteria with its plastic chairs and its bored cashier and its bright, cheap lights. He looked for a moment like a man who was about to run. Then his shoulders dropped. The fight went out of him. He put his head in his hands. They said nobody would get hurt, he whispered through his fingers. He said the words came out muffled and small. They said they would just grab the bag and let you go. He said it like he was praying for it to be true. He said it like he had been saying it to himself in the mirror for 3 weeks. I didn't know about the knife. I swear on my mother, I didn't know. She let him talk. She let him spill it all. The first contact 18 months ago in a bar parking lot in Carson City, the envelope of cash, the threat that came with the envelope. They had photos of his sister who lived in Portland, who worked as a nurse, who had no idea her brother was a prospect in a motorcycle club. They had her address. They had her schedule. They had the name of her dog. They told him very politely what would happen to her if he refused. He took the money. He told himself he was protecting his sister. He told himself the information he passed along is small. Routes, names, habits. He told himself it was nothing. Then 3 weeks ago, he had seen Ren leave the clubhouse with a duffel bag, and his handler had asked him very specific questions, and he had answered them. 27 minutes. That was how long the confession ran on her phone. When he was done, she stood up. You're going to walk out of this hospital, she said. You're going to walk out the front door. You're going to get on a bus. You're not going home. You're not going back to Reno. You're going to disappear the way you wanted me to disappear 3 weeks ago. And if you ever come within 500 miles of any member of this club again, my father will know everything. Do you understand? He nodded. He could not speak. She walked away. She found Doyle in the hallway outside the ICU. She pulled him into an empty room. She played him the recording. She watched his face go through the same sequence of emotions hers had gone through, only faster. Surprise, anger, the slow, hard settling of a man recalculating his world. He's a prospect, Doyle said. His voice was flat. He's family. He was, Ren said. You want me to tell your father? No, not yet. If he knows Trent disappears, the evidence gets tainted. Holloway walks. I need this clean. I need this to go to a federal courtroom. I need every name on that drive to face a jury. Doyle looked at her for a long, long moment. He had known her since she was 4 years old. He had taught her how to ride a bicycle in the parking lot of the Reno clubhouse. He had bought her ice cream after her first day of kindergarten. He had stood at the back of her 6th grade choir concert in his cut in a wall of leather among the soccer moms because her father had been out of state and someone had needed to be there. He saw in that moment that she was no longer a little girl. I'll handle Trent, he said. She nodded. Doyle disappeared down the stairwell. Trent Boudreau walked out the front door of Hollow Creek County Hospital 20 minutes later with one duffel bag and his prospect cut over his arm. By the time the sun set that day, his cut had been burned in a barrel on the back lot of a body shop in Eugene. He boarded a Greyhound headed east. He was never seen by the Iron Saints again. After Doily had gone, Wren walked to the small restroom at the end of the hallway. She locked the door. She turned on the cold water. She stood at the sink and looked at the stranger in the mirror. Short hair, dark circles under her eyes, a smear of dried blood on her neck that the nurse's wet rag had missed. And then it hit her. All of it. The knife going into Eli's side, the sound it had made, the blood on her hands, the walk in the rain, Marlene's face, the rosary, Trent's confession, the weight of the flash drive in her pocket. She gripped the edge of the sink. Her knuckles went white. The sob came from somewhere deep, somewhere she had sealed shut 3 weeks ago when she had cut her hair in a gas station bathroom in Medford. It tore through her chest like a fist. She pressed her hand over her mouth, muffling the sound. Because even now, even alone, she could not bring herself to let the world hear her break. She cried for 2 minutes, exactly 2 minutes. She timed it the way you time a wound that needs to drain before you stitch it closed. She let the pain come. She let it wash through her. She let it shake her body and blur her vision. Then she turned on the faucet. She splashed cold water on her face. She wiped her eyes. She breathed. Enough, she said to her reflection. Not harsh, not cold. The quiet, resolute command of a girl who had given herself permission to be human for 120 seconds and was now choosing to be a fortress again. She unlocked the door. She walked back into the hallway. She sat with Eli in the ICU that afternoon. He looked impossibly young against the white sheets, the tubes, the IV lines, the monitors, a whole landscape of fragility. But his chest rose and fell with a rhythm that was steady. Steady was alive. She held his hand. His fingers were cold but warming. I don't know if you can hear me, she said quietly, but what you did matters. It wasn't wasted. You stood up for a stranger, and that stranger is going to make it count. I promise. She squeezed his hand. She thought she felt the faintest pressure in return. She chose to believe it was real. Then she heard footsteps in the hallway, and something prickled at the base of her skull. 2 people walking. The footsteps were wrong, sharp, crisp. The click of hard-soled dress shoes on linoleum. Hospital staff wore soft-soled shoes, sneakers, clogs, whatever was easy on tired feet through a 12-hour shift. These shoes were Italian leather, polished, expensive. 2 men walked past the open doorway of room 304. Wren caught a glimpse just for a second. They wore loose green scrubs. They wore stethoscopes around their necks. They wore hospital identification badges clipped to their shirt pockets. The badges were wrong. The photos on them looked like stock images, generic smiling faces, the kind of faces you saw on the hospital website's About Us page. But the men wearing the badges were not smiling. The men wearing the badges had the dead professional eyes of men who belonged in a war zone, not a hospital corridor. And under the loose hem of the scrub pants of the man on the right, just above the ankle, a small telltale bulge, a holster. Wren did not freeze. Freezing was a luxury she could not afford. She moved. She slipped out into the hallway behind them. She watched their backs. They stopped at the nurse's station and asked in low voices for the room of a Mr. Hart. The night nurse, a heavy-set woman named Carol, who had been on shift since 6 in the evening and was not in a mood for extra attention, nodded and pointed without looking up. 304. The men nodded their thanks. They walked back down the hallway, not toward Eli's room, but toward the men's restroom at the end of the corridor. They were going to wait for the shift change. They were going to come back when the hallway was empty. They were going to inject something into Eli's IV line. By morning, the boy who had stepped between Ren and a knife would be a quiet, unexplained code in the middle of the night. A blood clot, the doctors would say. Sometimes these things happen with massive trauma, tragic, unpredictable. She had maybe 4 minutes. She did not go to her father. Royce was 3 floors down in conference with a lawyer who had flown in from Portland, and by the time she ran down and got him back up, the men would have done what they came to do. She did not go to Doyle. Doyle was at the front entrance, supervising the arrival of a fresh shift of nomads. She went to Marlene. Marlene was sleeping in a chair just outside the ICU, her rosary still in her hand. Ren shook her gently awake. She lied to her with a face that did not show it. There was a leak in the bathroom near the cafeteria, she said. The hospital wanted family members of ICU patients to use a different one for the next hour. Down the hall, around the corner, through the door marked staff. Ren walked her there. She locked Marlene inside the small staff break room with 3 chairs and a coffee maker. She told her she would come get her in 10 minutes. Marlene was too tired to argue. Ren ran back to the hallway outside 304. She pulled out her cheap prepaid phone. She started recording. She stood in the doorway of Eli's room with her shoulder against the frame. She watched the men's restroom door at the end of the hall. It opened. The 2 men came out. They had taken off the stethoscopes. They had unclipped the fake badges. They walked toward her with the easy professional stride of men who had done this before. When they saw her standing in the doorway, the man on the right slowed. The man on the left did not. Ren held the phone up where they could see it. The little red recording dot was visible. She spoke clearly, loudly, the way you speak when you need the recording to capture every word. You are not hospital staff. Your shoes are wrong. Your badges have stock photos. You have a pistol on your right ankle. You came here to kill a 17-year-old boy in a coma. Stop walking. The man on the left did not stop. His hand moved very smoothly toward the small of his back. The stairwell door at the other end of the hallway exploded inward. Hendricks came through, first 240 pounds of nomad, with a baseball bat in his hands. Behind him, Riggs, who had once been a Marine sniper in another life, with his service pistol drawn and a face like a closed door. 8 seconds. That was how long it took. No shots fired. The man on the left got his hand to the small of his back, and Riggs put a kneecap in his sternum that drove the air out of him in a single hard cough. The man on the right made the calculation and put his hands behind his head before Hendricks got to him. Both men ended up face down on the linoleum plastic zip ties around their wrists. The suppressed pistol that the first man had been reaching for skittered across the floor and came to rest under a vending machine. Ren stopped recording. She had clear video, faces visible, the weapon in frame, the timestamp in the corner. 8 seconds of the cleanest evidence she could have asked for. She tapped her pocket. Detective Whitlock is compromised, she said to Doyle, who had come up the stairwell behind Riggs, breathing hard. He's on Holloway's payroll. Everything we give him goes straight back to Holloway. We don't call the locals. We hold these 2 for the federal agents. We call the Portland office directly. Everything goes federal or everything falls apart. Doyle looked at the two men on the floor. He looked at Wren. He looked at the hallway, the camera in the corner of the ceiling, that by the grace of whatever God watched over Iron Saints had been pointed at this exact spot. Yes, ma'am, he said. He had never called her ma'am before. She went and got her father. She told Royce everything in the small private waiting room at the end of the hall. The flash drive, the ledger, Whitlock, Trent, the confession, the cleaners. She told him like a field commander delivering a briefing. Facts, clear, unadorned. Royce listened. The fury built behind his eyes like pressure behind a dam. When she said the name Trent, a vein in his temple pulsed. When she said the word cleaners, his fists became sledgehammers. He should be in the ground, Royce said about Trent. And if he were, the flash drive evidence would be compromised, Wren replied. Every lawyer Holloway hires would argue retaliation, argue we fabricated the data, argue the witness was eliminated. Trent walking away clean keeps the evidence clean. Royce stared at his daughter. He was seeing her maybe for the first time, not as his little girl, not as the princess of the Iron Saints, as a strategist, as a leader. Eli didn't stab anyone, Wren said, and her voice cracked on the boy's name. He didn't pull a gun. He just stood up. He stood up, Daddy. And if you go out there and beat Crane to death or throw Holloway in a river, you betray everything that boy represents. Royce's eyes were wet. He would deny it later. Beanbag rounds, Wren said. Non-lethal. Everyone goes home breathing. Everyone goes to prison, not to the morgue. He exhaled through his nose. The sound of a bull being told to stand down. Non-lethal, he said. Fine, but if they shoot first, we finish it, Fair Wren said. Late that afternoon, in the quiet of an empty office, Wren plugged the flash drive into Ruth's laptop one more time. She was alone. Marlene was sleeping again, finally in a chair beside Eli's bed. Royce was meeting with Doyle and four of his lieutenants in the conference room at the end of the hall planning the night. The hospital was quiet the way hospitals get quiet in the late afternoon when the day shift has gone home and the night shift has not yet found its rhythm. She had read the spreadsheet. She had read the document. She had not opened the third file, the video. She knew somewhere underneath everything that the third file was not just more evidence. It was something else. It was the thing the bag had been built to carry. The cache and the ledger had been the cargo. The video was the cargo's cargo. The reason a man like Vincent Holloway sent a man like Crane after a 16-year-old girl with a knife. She breathed. She clicked. The video opened. It was security camera footage, black and white, time-stamped in the corner. The date was 12 years old. A long, narrow hallway. A door. A man in a long, dark coat and wire-rimmed glasses standing in front of the door. Vincent Holloway, 12 years younger with more hair, the same fastidious posture. He was speaking to two men. The audio was thin, but clear enough. The woman in this house, Holloway said, his voice flat and businesslike. There is a problem. She has been speaking to a federal prosecutor. She knows about the Reno transfers. She knows about the Callaway account. One of the men nodded. She has a husband, Holloway said. Callaway, the biker. We do not touch him. He's too visible. We touch him, the entire West Coast goes up. But we touch the wife and the husband loses his anchor. He will spend the next 10 years drinking himself to death in a clubhouse and forget what she ever knew. Make it look like an accident, a fire, a car. I do not care. Tonight. The men nodded. Holloway turned and walked away from the camera. The video cut off. Wren did not move. She knew the date. She knew before she even looked at the timestamp what date it was. Her mother had died in a car accident on a wet road outside Reno on a night she was 4 years old. They had told her all her life that her mother had been driving home from a friend's house, that a deer had crossed the road, that the car had hit a tree, that it had been quick, that her mother had not suffered. Her father had not been the same after. Her father had drunk for a year, had built a wall around her so tall and so heavy that she had spent her whole life trying to find a window in it. Her father had never spoken her mother's name without his voice cracking. Her father had spent 12 years thinking it was an accident. She closed the laptop. She sat in the chair. She did not cry. The crying had happened earlier in the bathroom, 2 minutes that had drained the wound she had not known she was carrying. This was something else. This was something colder and harder and quieter. This was a woman sitting in an empty office at 4:30 in the afternoon, listening to a heater click on somewhere in the wall and choosing what to do next. She could tell her father. He had a right to know. He had spent 12 years believing in a story that was not true, and she had the truth in her hand. If she told him tonight, he would not stand on the bluff at the sawmill at midnight and listen to her ask him to choose a law. He would push Vincent Holloway off that cliff so fast and so hard that the river would not even break his fall, and the case would die with him. The ledger would be tainted. The video would be tainted. Whitlock would walk. 12 other officers in the federal ring would walk. The men who had ordered her mother killed, and the men who had bought her father's town, and the men who had paid for Eli's knife would all walk. She thought about it for a long time. She made her choice the way she had made every other choice in the last 24 hours. She made it because of a boy upstairs with 40 stitches in his side whose mother was sleeping in a plastic chair with a rosary in her hand and who had stood up because it was right. She would tell her father, but not tonight. Tonight the law, tomorrow the truth. She put the flash drive back in her pocket. She walked out into the hallway. She found Doyle. It's time, she said. Let's go get Crane. Doyle and 4 nomads brought Crane to the hospital basement at 6:45 that evening. The motel where he had been holed up was 2 miles outside town. The breach took 15 seconds. He had been alone watching cable news, eating cold pizza out of a box. He had not even reached for his weapon. He sat now in a folding chair in a windowless room beneath the hospital, his scorpion tattoo distorted by a fresh purple bruise along his jaw. His wrists were zip-tied behind him. His dead eyes for the first time were alive with something that looked like fear. Wren sat across from him in another folding chair. She rested her forearms on her knees. She looked at him the way her father looked at men in the boardroom of the Reno clubhouse, with patience. You have 2 choices, Wren said. You can call Vincent Holloway. You can tell him you have the bag. You can tell him you have the girl. You can tell him you're holding both at the old sawmill on Route 4 midnight tonight. You can tell him you need him to come personally to verify because the package is a problem and the buyer is getting nervous. Crane stared at her. Or Wren said, you can refuse, in which case I walk out of this room. I hand you and your 3 friends who are upstairs in the security office to the federal agents. I hand them the recording of Trent Boudreau naming you. I hand them the security camera footage of 2 men trying to kill the boy you stabbed last night. I hand them every piece of evidence that puts you in the middle of an attempted murder of a minor and a kidnapping conspiracy. You go to federal prison for 25 to life with no deal to cut because the man you would have cut a deal against will never know you were taken alive. She paused. Or you make the call, and maybe in 5 years when you finish testifying against Holloway, you walk out of witness protection into a small town in Iowa with a different name and a job at a hardware store. Maybe. Crane calculated. She could see it, the gears turning, the exits closing, the cold understanding that the girl across from him was not bluffing and was not afraid and was not going to give him a third option. He nodded. He made the call. The conversation lasted 90 seconds. Holloway agreed. Midnight, the sawmill. He would come personally. He was not happy, but he was coming. Wren stood up. She nodded at Doyle. Before she left the basement, she stopped at room 3041 one last time. She stood over Eli's bed and she memorized his face. The shaggy hair pushed back by a nurse's careful fingers. The bandages white against the white sheets. The slow, steady rise and fall of his chest. I'm gonna do something tonight, she said quietly, that scares me more than anything I've ever done. She touched his hand. His skin was warm, warmer than it had been that afternoon. But I keep thinking about you, about the way you jumped over that counter with nothing but a dish rag. You didn't have a plan. You didn't have backup. You just moved. Because it was right, she breathed out. So I'm gonna move too. And when you wake up, this is going to be over. All of it, I promise. She walked out of room 304. She did not look back. Outside, the rain was coming down in long silver sheets across the parking lot, and somewhere off in the dark forest above Hollow Creek, the old sawmill was waiting. The old Hollow Creek sawmill sat on a high bluff overlooking the Deschutes River fork, a skeletal ruin of rusted corrugated metal and rotting timber that had been surrendering to the Oregon weather for 2 decades. The main warehouse was a vast cathedral-like space, 2 stories of open floor, beneath a lattice of steel catwalks and overhead beams. The roof was half gone, stripped by winter storms, letting in patches of the ski in the long, slow rain. Wren arrived at 9:33, 2.5 hours early. She had drawn the layout of the warehouse on a paper napkin earlier that afternoon, while Royce was meeting with his lieutenants. She had walked the perimeter once on foot with Doyle and Riggs, identifying catwalks, machinery positions, blind spots, choke points. She had calculated sight lines and angles. She had positioned 6 high-intensity construction floodlights, each capable of throwing 14,000 lumens of pure white glare. She had made Doyle repeat the plan twice and corrected him when he got a detail wrong. She was 16 years old, and she was commanding a military operation. The nomads moved through the sawmill like ghosts. Several of them were former military. 2 had done tours overseas. Riggs, the Marine sniper, knew how to set an ambush the way a surgeon knew how to hold a scalpel. They rigged the floodlights in the rafters, wired to a single switch that Wren would hold from the catwalk 30 feet above the floor. Each man carried a shotgun loaded with beanbag rounds. Each man also carried a sidearm with hollow points in case the world stopped listening to good intentions. Royce took his position at midnight. He stood alone in the center of the warehouse, a solitary figure in the vast dark space lit only by a single battery-powered work lamp on the floor. The lamp cast his shadow long and crooked across the debris like a sundial marking the final hour. Crane sat tied to a folding chair behind him, gagged and bruised, a prop in the final act. Wren climbed to the catwalk at 11:45. The metal rungs were slick with rain and rust. She crouched behind the railing, the floodlight switch in her left hand, her phone in her right. She looked down at her father standing alone in the dark and felt a terror so profound it nearly buckled her knees. If this went wrong, he would be the first man in the crossfire. She pushed the fear down. She locked it away. There would be time for fear later. At 12:07, Doyle's voice crackled in her earpiece. Two vehicles, black Cadillac Escalades. They look armored, heavy, military grade. Wren's stomach dropped. She had planned for 4 men, maybe 5. Not armored vehicles and professional soldiers. Hold position, she said. Nobody moves until I say. The Escalades rolled through the loading bay door like hearses, dark and deliberate. They stopped 20 yards from Royce. 6 men stepped out. Not street criminals, private military contractors. They moved with fluid, lethal economy, checking corners, scanning the darkness, suppressed carbines at the low ready night, vision goggles flipped up on top of their helmets. Then Vincent Holloway stepped out. He was a disappointing figure, small, slight. He wore a charcoal wool overcoat that probably cost more than Marlene Hart made in 6 months. Thin hands, wire-rimmed glasses, the fastidious manner of a man who viewed the world as a series of transactions to be reconciled. He held a black umbrella over his head, fussy and precise, even in a ruin. You are not Crane, Holloway said. His voice was bored. Crane is indisposed, Royce said. I am the father. Holloway sighed. He inspected his cuticles for a moment. The biker, he said almost to himself, I was hoping to avoid this. It's all so theatrical. He gestured to his men with a lazy wave, the way someone might gesture to a waiter to bring the check. Kill him. Find the girl. Find the drive. Burn the building. I have a flight to catch. 6 rifles rose. 6 red laser sights converged on Royce's chest. Wren's hand tightened on the switch. Now, she said. She threw it. The warehouse exploded with light. 84,000 lumens, all directed downward, turning the darkness into a blinding white inferno. The mercenaries' eyes, adjusted to near-total darkness, were hit with a wall of light that was physically painful. 2 of them stumbled backward. One dropped to a knee, raising his rifle to shield his face. The night vision goggles on top of their helmets caught the reflected glare and became instruments of additional disorientation, useless in the sudden flood. The nomads moved fast and hard, from behind the rusted machinery, from the shadows, from positions the mercenaries had not been able to check because Wren had placed the lights to create specific blind spots. 2 beanbag rounds dropped the first mercenary, hitting him center mass and folding him in half. A second went down the same way, but the remaining 4 adapted in seconds. Combat training reasserted itself through the shock. 2 dropped behind the armored Escalades and began returning fire. Controlled aim bursts. The suppressed carbines made a sound like angry whispers, like men hissing in another room. Rounds sparked off machinery. They shattered one of the floodlights. They sent debris flying. Then the sound Wren had been dreading, a cry of pain from the shadows. Riggs. A round had caught him in the thigh as he advanced along the east wall. He went down, dragging himself behind a steel column, blood already soaking through his jeans. His jaw was clenched so hard the muscles in his neck stood out like cables, his hands pressed against the wound. Below her, Royce charged a mercenary who had come around the rear of the nearest Escalade. 240 pounds of fury, head down, shoulder lowered. He hit the man like a freight train, slamming him into the side of the vehicle hard enough to dent the armored panel. But the mercenary fired as he was being hit. A round tore through Royce's leather cut, and carved a hot furrow across his left shoulder. Royce roared, not in pain, in anger. He grabbed the stunned mercenary by the throat and the belt and hurled him into the concrete floor with a sound like a heavy bag being dropped from a roof. More mercenaries went down, but the last two had found cover behind a thick concrete pillar near the loading bay, and they were laying down disciplined fire that pinned two of the nomads behind the rusted housing of an old bandsaw. The situation was stuck. Riggs was bleeding. Royce was bleeding. The ambush had become a stalemate, and a stalemate was a fight Wren could not afford. But she could see the two mercenaries from the catwalk. She was directly above and behind their position. They did not know she was there. They were watching the floor, watching the angles, calculating where the next nomad would come from. They had not looked up. She did not have a weapon. She had a switch. And she had a floodlight bolted to a rusted metal rafter 10 feet to her right. She crawled along the wet, slick metal grating. She reached the floodlight. She grabbed the housing with both hands. She felt the heat radiating through the casing, the metal nearly hot enough to burn her palms. She gritted her teeth. She twisted. The beam swept across the wall and hit the two mercenaries full in the face from their unprotected flank. They flinched. One raised his arm to shield his eyes. A half-second opening. Hendricks came around the pillar like a landslide and clotheslined the first man so hard the mercenary's helmet flew off and skidded across the floor. Doyle swung his baton once, twice, three times against the second man's forearm, his knee, his helmet. The man went limp. Silence. The fight was over. Less than 90 seconds total. It had felt like an hour. Wren keyed her radio. Riggs is hit. Sita. Through and through, Doyle reported, kneeling beside Riggs. Missed the artery. He's going to make it, but he needs a hospital. We get him out now. Get him out, Wren said. Take the van. Go. Two nomads carried Riggs toward the loading bay. He was conscious, jaw clenched, one bloody fist raised in salute as he passed the other men. The nomads who were still standing returned the salute. Then they turned back to the work. Wren watched the van drive away into the rain. She felt the weight of command settle into her bones. She had ordered men into a fight. One of them was bleeding because of her plan. That weight would never fully lift. She did not want it to. Royce walked toward Holloway. Holloway had not run, had not fought, had simply stood beside his Escalade in paralyzed disbelief, his umbrella gone. His expensive coat spattered with rain and concrete dust, his glasses crooked on his nose, with the look of a man whose world had been rearranged without his permission. Royce grabbed him by the collar and lifted him onto his toes. Holloway tried to speak. You can't, he said, his voice thin and high. You don't understand. I have files. I have insurance. I have arrangements with people. If anything happens to me, the things on those files get released. Audio, video, photographs. You and your club are going to wish you had never. You are going to. Shut up, Royce said, not loudly, just final. Holloway shut up. Royce dragged him through the loading bay and out into the rain to the edge of the bluff overlooking the river. The water far below was swollen by days of rain, a constant churning roar of dark water and broken white. The drop was 80 feet. The current was fast and merciless. Royce pushed Holloway to the edge. The smaller man stumbled, nearly going over. He caught himself and looked down at the black water, and the sound that came out of him was not a word. It was the small animal sound of a man encountering, for the first time in his life, something that his money could not fix. Please, Holloway said. The word came out thin and high-stripped of every pretense. Please, I can pay you anything. Name a price. Anything. Doyle appeared at Royce's side. He looked at the river. He looked at Holloway. He looked at Royce. River is deep, Doyle said quietly. Current is fast. Nobody would ever find him. Royce stood at the edge of the bluff. Rain streamed down his face. Blood ran down his arm in a slow red line. He looked at the man who had sent killers after his daughter. The man who had ordered a 16-year-old girl brought in or killed over a flash drive. The man whose greed had put a knife in the side of a 17-year-old kid who was guilty of nothing except courage. He thought about the river. He thought about how easy it would be. One push, a short fall, the cold water, the current. No body, no trial, no lawyers, no appeals, just gravity and the river and the rain washing everything clean. The old Royce would have done it. The man he had been 5 years ago, 10 years ago, would not have hesitated. Blood for blood. The books balanced with the body in the water. Then he heard the footsteps behind him. Light footsteps, quick and sure. Wren appeared at the edge of the loading bay. She was soaked through. Her short hair was plastered to her forehead. Her face was pale in the rain. There was a cut on her palm from the floodlight, housing blood running between her fingers and mixing with the rainwater. She walked toward her father. She did not run. She did not shout. She walked with the measured, deliberate pace of someone who knew exactly what she was about to do and exactly why. She stopped 3 feet from the edge. "Daddy," she said. Royce did not look at her. His jaw was locked. The rain ran into his eyes and down his beard. "Daddy, look at me." He turned his head just enough to see her. "The boy in that hospital," Wren said, and her voice was steady despite everything. "He didn't kill anyone. He didn't break any bones. He didn't throw anyone off a cliff. He walked into a fight with armed men carrying nothing but a dish rag. And he won. Not because he was stronger, because he was better. He was better than them. And he was better than this." She gestured at the scene. The bluff, the river, the weeping man at the edge. "If you throw him off that cliff, you prove every person who ever called you a thug right. Every cop, every prosecutor, every reporter who said the Iron Saints are just criminals with motorcycles. And you prove Eli wrong. You prove that standing up, doing the right thing, bleeding for a stranger, none of it matters. Because in the end, the biggest fist wins." Royce stared at her. His eyes were burning, not from the rain, from something deeper, something that had been tearing through walls he had built over decades. "He ordered them to kill you," Royce said. His voice was raw, broken in places he had not known could break. He sat in his car. He said the words, "Kill her. Like you were nothing. Like my baby girl was a line item on a ledger." "I know," Wren said. Then she breathed. This was the moment. She had decided that morning to wait. She had told herself the right thing was to wait. Tonight the law, tomorrow the truth. But standing here with Royce on the edge of the cliff, with Holloway weeping in the mud at her father's feet, with the rain coming down between them like a curtain, she understood with a clarity that felt almost cold that there was no tomorrow if she did not say it tonight. Not really. Royce would never look at this man the same way again. She had to give him the one thing that could keep him from the river. She had to give him the truth. "There's something else, Daddy," she said. Royce did not move. "I opened the third file on the drive. The video." She breathed. It was him. It was him 12 years ago. standing in a hallway telling two men what to do. He used Mom's name, Daddy. He told them she had spoken to a federal prosecutor. He told them she was a problem. He told them to make it look like an accident, a car, a fire. He didn't care which. The rain seemed to hold its breath. It wasn't a deer, Wren said. It wasn't a wet road. It was him, the man at your feet. He killed Mom, and he sat in his car and ate his dinner and went home that night, and he's been alive ever since. 12 years. She watched her father. She watched in real time the inside of a man come apart and put itself back together in a way it had never been put together before. Royce did not move. He did not breathe. His hand was still on Holloway's collar. His eyes were on Wren. I am telling you this, Wren said, because if I do not tell you, you will spend the rest of your life thinking I lied to you tonight. And I will not lie to you. Not ever, not about this. She took one step closer, close enough to touch him. But Daddy, if you push him off that cliff, you give him what he wanted 12 years ago. You give him the rest of your life just like he tried to give it to himself. He took Mom because he wanted to take you, and you gave him exactly what he wanted, and you have been giving it to him every day for 12 years. And tonight, if you push him, he wins. Even from the bottom of that river, he wins. Royce's jaw moved. No sound came out. Mom didn't die for you to throw your life away, Daddy. Mom didn't die so I could grow up without you and then watch you choose a river over a courtroom. Mom died because she was talking to a prosecutor. She was trying to do this the right way. She was trying to put him in a cage. We finish what she started. We finish it now, tonight, with the law, the way she would have wanted. The silence between them was absolute. Even the rain seemed to soften. Royce looked at his daughter. He looked at Holloway. He looked at the river. He looked for a long, terrible moment into a place inside himself that he had been refusing to look at for 12 years. Then his hand opened. Holloway collapsed onto the wet ground, gasping, curling into himself like a child waking from a nightmare. His expensive coat was ruined. His glasses were gone, fallen into the mud somewhere. He wept without sound, his thin body shaking. Roy stepped back from the edge. He turned away from the river. He faced his daughter. The rain ran between them like a curtain. He did not speak for a long time. Then he said very quietly, "Call the sheriff." His voice was drained. The voice of a man who had just fought the hardest battle of his life and had won by not throwing a single punch. "Tell him we have a present for the federal agents." Wren pulled out her phone. She dialed the Portland Federal Field Office's 24-hour tip line. She identified herself. She described the money laundering operation. She listed the contents of the flash drive. She gave the coordinates of the sawmill. She told them to send a team, quickly. Doyle zip-tied Holloway's hands behind his back. The nomads loaded the unconscious mercenaries into the back of one of the Escalades. They left the vehicles where they were, doors open in the rain. The Iron Saints vanished from the sawmill and silent engines fading into the dark roads above Hollow Creek the way they had come. By the time Sheriff Beckett and the state police arrived, followed 30 minutes later by two black government vehicles from the Portland office, the warehouse was empty of bikers. All that remained were 6 zip-tied mercenaries on their knees in the rain, a battered crane still tied to his folding chair, and Vincent Holloway sitting in the mud with a flash drive taped to his forehead with a strip of duct tape. Wren's idea. She had thought it added a certain poetic symmetry. The drive back to the hospital was quiet. Wren sat in the van with her head leaning against the cold metal wall, her eyes closed. The adrenaline was draining out of her body, leaving an exhaustion so complete it felt like her bones were dissolving. Roy sat across from her, his shoulder field dressed and wrapped in gauze. It would need stitches. He had refused to be looked at until they were back at the hospital. "You were right," he said into the darkness of the van. She opened her eyes. "About all of it," Roy said. "Trent, Whitlock, the plan, the river, about Eli, about what he represents, about your mother." He looked at his scarred knuckles, the tattoos covering his arms, the leather cut that had defined his identity for 3 decades. "I have spent my whole life living by a code," he said. "Loyalty, strength, blood for blood. And I thought that was enough. I thought that was what made a man." He was quiet for a moment. "But that kid in the hospital, he never lived by any code. He never swore any oath. He just saw someone in trouble, and he stood up. No backup, no army, no plan, just him and a dish rag and more guts than any man I have ever known." He looked at her. His eyes were wet. 12 years, he said. 12 years I drank myself half to death, thinking I was mourning her by being angry. Tonight I almost gave him the last thing he wanted. I almost gave him me." He breathed out. "You asked me to be the man you used to believe in. I do not know if I am that man, Wren, but I am going to try." She reached across the van and took his hand. His fingers were rough, scarred, calloused from decades of gripping handlebars and making fists. She held them gently. "That's all I ever wanted," she said. They rode the rest of the way in silence, father and daughter, the storm and the mountain, connected by something stronger than blood, stronger than a code, connected by the choice to be better. Eli Hart opened his eyes on a Friday morning. The first thing he saw was the ceiling. White acoustic tiles, each dotted with tiny holes lit by a fluorescent panel that cast a flat antiseptic glow. The second thing he noticed was the beeping, a steady rhythmic pulse from somewhere to his left. The third thing was the pain, a deep, hot line of fire along his left side from his ribs to his hip, pulsing with every heartbeat. He tried to move. His body rebelled instantly. "Easy." A voice, soft, urgent, familiar in a way he could not quite place. "Don't try to move. You've got about 40 stitches and you're missing a spleen. The doctor says you're supposed to lie still for at least another week." Eli blinked. He turned his head slowly, carefully, and he saw her. Wren was sitting on the wide windowsill, one knee pulled up to her chest. She looked different from the girl who had walked into the diner 4 nights ago. The oversized leather jacket was draped over a chair, laundered now, but still carrying a faint shadow of rust brown that no amount of detergent could fully erase. She wore a soft gray hoodie instead. Her face was clean, her short hair was pulled back, and her storm cloud eyes were fixed on him with an intensity that made the room feel very small. "You're okay," Eli said. It was not a question. It was the first thing his brain produced, the thought that had been frozen in place since the moment the world went dark on the diner floor. "Yes," Eli Wren said. She smiled, and it was the first genuine, unguarded smile she had allowed herself in weeks. "I'm okay, because of you." "Did I win?" he asked. His voice was a dry crackle, and it hurt to speak, but the corner of his mouth turned up. Wren let out a breath that was half laugh, half sob. "You won. You held the line and the cavalry came. They're all gone, Eli. Crane, Holloway, the cleaners, the cops who took the money. The federal agents have them. It's over. Good, he whispered. His eyes drifted shut for a moment as the morphine pulled at him. That's good, another voice, warm, breaking with emotion. Eli opened his eyes again. His mother was there. Marlene stood beside the bed, her hand pressed to her mouth, tears streaming down her face. She had not slept in 4 days. She had barely eaten. She had worn a path in the linoleum between the waiting room and the ICU. But in this moment, with her son's eyes open and focused, she looked like a woman who had just witnessed a resurrection. Hey, Mom, Eli said. Marlene collapsed forward, wrapping her arms around him as gently as she could, pressing her face into his shoulder, her body shaking with sobs that she had been holding back through 4 days of terror and prayer. My boy, she whispered. My brave, stupid, wonderful boy. Eli winced at the pressure on his side, but he did not complain. He held his mother with his free arm and let her cry. After a while, the door opened. The air shifted the way it always did when Royce Calloway entered a space, not because he was loud, because he was a force, and forces did not need to announce themselves. He was not wearing his cut today, a dark shirt that strained across his broad chest, heavy denim, his left arm in a sling, the shoulder wound bandaged beneath the fabric. But he could not hide what he was. He filled the doorway like a wall. His beard was the color of weathered iron. His arms were mapped with ink that told decades of stories. He carried a motorcycle helmet in one hand and a small paper bag in the other. Eli's eyes widened. You're him, Eli rasped. The dad. I am, Roy said. His voice was quiet, almost reverent, as if he were entering a church. He walked to the bedside. His boots barely made a sound. He looked down at the bandages, the tubes of fragility of a 17-year-old kid who worked at a diner and had never been in a fight before the one that nearly killed him. He extended his hand. It was massive. It engulfed Eli's completely, but he did not squeeze. He held the boy's hand with a gentleness that seemed impossible for a man that size. You saved my world, son, Roy said. His voice was thick with an emotion he had spent a lifetime suppressing. There aren't words for that. There isn't enough money in the world to pay for that. You gave me back my daughter. Eli looked up at him. He felt the calluses on the big man's palm, the rough geography of a life lived with fists and handlebars. I just couldn't let them take her, he murmured. He had a knife. She was scared. It wasn't right. No, Royce agreed, it wasn't right. And most men would have run. Most men would have hid. You stood up. He released Eli's hand and reached into his pocket. He pulled out a set of car keys and placed them on the bedside table. My boys went by your house, he said. We saw the Taurus in the driveway. Transmission was shot. Head gasket was blown. Eli winced. Yeah, I was saving up. It's fixed, Roy said. New transmission, new engine, fresh paint. We even fixed the air conditioning. It runs better than the day it rolled off the lot. Eli stared at him. The car. The car he had been trying to fix every Saturday for 8 years. The car his father had left behind like a broken promise wrapped in rusted metal. Fixed, running, whole. Then Royce reached into his other pocket and pulled out a second set of keys. Heavier. The fob bore the silver shield of a famous American motorcycle company. I figured a young man who stared down a knife deserves something with a little more soul, he said. Something that understands the wind. There's a brand new Sportster sitting in your garage. Matte black. Custom exhaust. Paid in full. Insurance and registration handled. Eli looked at the keys in his palm. His throat was tight. His eyes were burning. "I can't accept this," he whispered. "You are not accepting a gift," Eli Roy said. His tone shifted from warm to solemn. "You're accepting a tribute." He looked at Marlene, who was watching from the other side of the bed, her eyes wide with a disbelief that bordered on fear. "We set up a trust in your name this morning," Roy said. "Full ride, tuition, books, housing, engineering school, medical school. Whatever your son chooses, the Iron Saints are picking up the tab." Marlene covered her mouth. A sound escaped her that was somewhere between a gasp and a prayer. "Mr. Calloway, you don't have to. I do," Roy said gently, cutting her off. "He bled for my family. Mrs. Hart. My family will sweat for his. That's the code." He turned back to Eli. "You are family now, kid. You understand. You have brothers in every state. You ever have trouble, you ever feel unsafe, you make one call, and we answer." Eli looked at his mother. She was radiant. Her exhaustion and grief had transformed into a pride so fierce it seemed to fill the room with light. He looked at Wren. She was watching from the windowsill with a smile that reached her eyes for the first time since they had met. For the first time in his life, Eli Hart, the invisible boy from Hollow Creek, the background character in his own town, felt seen. He felt valued. He felt like he mattered. "Thank you," he whispered. Roy stepped back. He gave the boy a sharp, respectful nod, the kind a commanding officer gives a soldier who has proved himself under fire. "No," Roy said. "Thank you." He walked toward the door. He paused in the frame. He looked back at Wren and something passed between them. A question asked and answered without a single word. Then he walked out, his boots heavy on the linoleum, leaving the door open behind him. Wren sat with Eli for a while after Royce left. Marlene had gone to call her sister to share the news, to cry happy tears into a phone in the hallway. The room was quiet except for the beep of the cardiac monitor and the distant rumble of 200 engines beginning to stir in the parking lot below. "They're leaving," Eli said, looking toward the window. "Yeah," Wren said. "Back to the road. Back to their lives." "And you?" The question hung in the air like a held note. Wren looked out the window at the sea of chrome and leather assembling in formation below. She could see her father's Road King gleaming black in the autumn sun, waiting at the head of the column. She could go with them. She could ride home, back to Reno, back to the clubhouse, back to the life she had been born into. Her father would welcome her. The club would celebrate. She would be the president's daughter again, shielded, protected, untouchable. Or she could choose something else. "I'm not going with them," Wren said quietly. Eli looked at her. "I'm going to stay here for a while. Help your mom while you recover." "Get my feet under me." She paused. "I'm going to enroll in school, finish my diploma, apply to college." "College?" Eli blinked. "For what?" Law, Wren said. And the word felt right in her mouth, solid and true, like a key turning in a lock. "I spent my whole life watching people solve problems with fists and money and fear. I want to learn how to solve them with words, with evidence, with the law." She looked at him, and there was something luminous in her expression, a clarity that came not from desperation, but from conviction. "You changed something, Eli. You didn't throw a punch. You didn't pull a weapon. You stood in front of a girl with a dish rag, and you said no, and that was enough. That was more powerful than 200 motorcycles." She paused. "My mother died trying to do this the right way, with prosecutors, with evidence, with the law. I want to spend the rest of my life finishing what she started. I want to spend the rest of my life being that kind of powerful. Eli was quiet for a long moment. Then he smiled, a real smile, wide enough to crease his pale cheeks and make the pain in his side feel very far away. Law school, he said. That's going to make your dad's head explode. Wren laughed. A real laugh, sudden and bright and surprised. The laugh of a girl who had forgotten she was capable of it. He'll survive. He's tough. A knock at the door, soft. Doyle stood there holding a black leather vest. He handed it to Wren without a word and walked away. She brought it back to the bed and held it up so Eli could see. It was not a full member's cut. It was high-quality leather clean and new without the patches and rockers that marked a patch member. But on the left breast, a single patch had been stitched in white thread against the black leather. Protected by the Iron Saints. My dad left this for you, Wren said. She draped the vest over the back of the chair beside Eli's bed. Wear that and nobody anywhere will ever touch you again. From the parking lot below, the sound began to rise. It started as a low rumble like the first tremor of an earthquake, vibrating through the walls and the floor and the glass. Then it grew, building in layers, engine after engine joining the chorus, until the sound was a living, breathing force that shook the pictures on the walls and made the water in the pitcher on Eli's bedside table tremble in concentric rings. 200 engines roared to life in unison. Wren walked to the window and looked down. The formation was perfect, 3 abreast, stretching back through the parking lot and onto the street, a river of black and chrome flowing toward the highway. At the head, Royce's Road King rumbled with deep, unmistakable authority. She placed her hand against the glass. She could feel the vibration through her palm, through her bones. Royce did not look up. He did not wave. He kicked his bike into gear, and the column moved. 200 machines rolled in perfect formation, their pipes singing a song that the town of Hollow Creek would talk about for generations. They rolled down Elm Street, past the hospital, past the diner that was still closed behind yellow police tape, past the hardware store and the barber shop and the church. They turned onto Route 9 and headed for the highway, the sound of their engines fading slowly like thunder rolling away after a storm. Wren watched until the last taillight disappeared beyond the ridge. Then she turned back to the room. Eli was watching her. His eyes were heavy with morphine, but they were warm. You really aren't going. No, Wren said. She sat back down on the windowsill and pulled her knee to her chest. I'm done running, Eli. I'm done hiding. I'm done being someone else's story. She looked out the window at the empty road, at the quiet town settling back into its ordinary rhythm, at the pale October sun climbing above the ridge and spilling golden light across the valley. This is where I start my own. The legend of Hollow Creek spread the way all great stories do, in whispers at first, then in louder voices, then in the kind of full-throated telling that happens in diners and barbershops around fires when the night is long and the audience is willing. They told the story of the boy who stood between a girl and a knife with nothing but a dish rag. They told the story of the girl who called an army but commanded it with her conscience. They told the story of the father who knelt before a cleaning lady and chose the law over the river. They told the story of the night 200 engines shook a town awake and reminded it what thunder sounded like when it came to answer courage. Eli Hart made a full recovery. He graduated from high school. He enrolled in engineering school on the Iron Saints Scholarship. Years later, he opened a small restoration shop in Portland, specializing in classic American muscle cars and vintage motorcycles. The matte black Sportster sat in the front window of his shop for years, polished and gleaming, a reminder he never needed to explain to anyone. The Ford Taurus his father had left behind ran for another 100,000 miles before he finally retired it to the back of the shop. Not because it was broken, because it had done its job. It had taught him that some things are worth fixing even when the world tells you to give up. Wren Calloway finished high school in Hollow Creek. She graduated first in her class. She went to college, then law school. She passed the bar on her first attempt. She never wore the leather again, but she kept a photograph of her father in her office beside a framed menu from Pop's Diner, the one with the coffee ring stain and the ketchup smear that might have been ketchup and might have been something else. She specialized in federal prosecution. In her first year as an assistant district attorney, she helped bring down a corruption ring that spanned 2 states. The flash drive had been the first domino. She made sure it was not the last. Detective Marcus Whitlock was one of 19 law enforcement officers indicted in the federal sweep that followed the Holloway case. He pled guilty to 12 counts of public corruption and was sentenced to 14 years in a federal penitentiary. He never set foot in Hollow Creek again. Riggs recovered fully from his leg wound. He rode for another 12 years before retiring to a cabin in Montana with a German shepherd named Gunshot and a view of the mountains that stretched all the way to the horizon. He never talked about the sawmill, but on certain nights when the wind was right and the stars were out, he would sit on his porch and listen to the silence, and he would remember the sound of a 16-year-old girl's voice crackling through a cheap radio, saying the word that saved a dozen lives. Now, Royce Calloway continued to lead the Iron Saints for another decade. He never spoke publicly about what happened in Hollow Creek, but those closest to him noticed a change in him after that October. He was quieter, more deliberate. He still commanded with authority, but the authority had shifted from the gravity of a man who could destroy to the gravity of a man who chose not to. He visited Hollow Creek once a year, always in October, always alone. He would park his Road King outside Pop's Diner, which had reopened under new management, with a fresh coat of paint and a working neon sign. He would sit in the booth where Eli had once served coffee to a girl with storm cloud eyes. And he would drink his coffee black and leave $100 tip on the table. He never explained why to anyone. He did not need to. Vincent Holloway was convicted on 47 federal counts, including money laundering, conspiracy, corruption of public officials, the ordering of the attempted murder of a minor, and after Wren provided the security footage of a hallway 12 years and 1,000 miles away, the murder of one Margaret Calloway. He was sentenced to life without the possibility of parole. In his sentencing hearing, the judge noted that the evidence against him was among the most comprehensive and cleanly documented he had ever seen. He did not know that the documentation had been managed by a 16-year-old girl standing in a hospital corridor over 2 disarmed assassins, calmly dictating the chain of evidence to a man with a scar from his ear to his chin. Marlene Hart quit her second job. She did not need it anymore. She spent her mornings tending a small garden in her backyard. She spent her afternoons volunteering at the hospital where her son had nearly died and been reborn. She never fully understood the world that had descended on her town that October. The chrome and the leather and the men who knelt before her and called her son a hero. But she understood the result. Her boy was alive, her bills were paid, and a girl named Wren brought flowers to her kitchen table every Sunday afternoon and called her ma'am and never not once let her forget that her son's courage had meant something. Eli and Ren remained close friends for the rest of their lives, bound by a Tuesday night in October when the world had revealed itself in the starkest possible terms. Good and evil, courage and cowardice, the choice to stand or the choice to look away. They never became more than friends, though the people of Hollow Creek speculated endlessly. The truth was simpler and more profound than romance. They were two people who had seen each other at their most vulnerable and their most brave. And that kind of seeing creates a bond that does not need a name. It just exists, steady and true, like the heartbeat of a cardiac monitor counting the moments of a life that almost ended and did not. The story of Hollow Creek reminds us of something important. It reminds us that heroes do not always wear capes or carry badges. Sometimes they wear greasy aprons and drive broken-down sedans. Sometimes they are 16-year-old girls who choose the law over the fist, the courtroom over the river, the hard right over the easy wrong. It teaches us that true bravery is not the absence of fear. It is the decision to stand your ground when every nerve in your body is screaming at you to run. And most of all, it reminds us that loyalty, real loyalty, the kind that bleeds and bruises and holds the line, is a currency more valuable than all the gold in the world. In room 304, where a cardiac monitor once counted the fragile heartbeats of a boy who refused to sit down, the memory of courage lived on. Not in the chrome and the thunder that had shaken the valley, not in the flash drive that had brought down an empire, but in the quieter, unshakable truth that one person standing up at the right moment can change everything. The thunder had rolled, the storm had passed, and in its wake, two lives had begun again, stronger than before, forged in the fire of a single night, when a boy with a dish rag proved that the bravest thing in the world is not the willingness to fight, it is the willingness to stand.